Today, one day after picking up the endorsement of the New Yorkers for Constitutional Freedoms PAC. He was in Bronx yesterday. With me now to talk more about the Cruz campaign is the Reverend Jason McGuire. He is the head of New Yorkers for Constitutional Freedoms. Welcome back to Capitol tonight.
Yeah, good to be with you.
We have not seen you in a while.
No, it's been a while.
It is good to see you. So it's interesting. One might look at Ted Cruz and say this man has very little in common with the majority, but not all, New Yorkers. So he's really speaking to those people and trying to reach those people who do have something in common with him, which is why you see him at the location that he chose today, for example.
Well, I do. I think if you listen to people that are following after kind of the Cuomo de Blasio philosophy of things here, then no, you're not going to have a lot in common with Senator Ted Cruz. But if you're like a lot of the rest of this state who, have no place in this state, according to Governor Cuomo, then of course you're going to find a home, and what Senator Ted Cruz is saying is going to resonate with you well.
He is very conservative. I mean, there's no doubt about that, correct? I mean, you consider him more conservative than John Kasich, for example.
Well, he is a Republican from outside of New York State, and that means something. Oftentimes in New York, it's the Republicans here that we would call Democrats in many other states. So we recognize that. But again, this is New York. We're looking at a primary race here. And, as I like to say, we fight for values here in where I stand.
So values, that gives us a good segue. This whole uproar over his denigration of New York values. He did not back away from that. He, in fact, repeated that statement in the Bronx, which is probably about as Democrat-dominated a county as you can get in New York. And people were sort of questioning why he would do that. Now, we'll talk about the political strategy in a moment, but you're not offended by what he said. Why?
No, I'm heartened by him saying those types of statements, and he's not backing away from them, because I am a New Yorker. I've been born here, lived here my whole life, and I understand what he's talking about. There is a very different value system when you listen to folks like Governor Cuomo and Mayor Bill de Blasio. The types of things they're advocating for are not the things that I hold. And so we're not talking about patriotism, or we're not talking about flying the flag and mom and apple pie. We're talking about the economy that is so difficult here for the business community. We're talking about the tax rates. We're talking about the fact that we are intolerant of anyone who disagrees with us.
But aren't we also talking about abortion rights and gay rights and some of the other progressive institutions, if you will, those self-same Democrats and not a few, more moderate Republicans believe in?
You've got a governor now who is banning travel to multiple states because those states have said that men have no place in women's restrooms.
Well, this is about the transit bathroom issue, right?
Yeah, it's a religious freedom bill, and that is essentially what we are arguing over here. And so when the governor says that here, and when Senator Ted Cruz talks about New York values, I understand what he's talking about. Mine are not Cuomo's.
Okay, but Reverend, with all due respect, Ted Cruz is not running against Andrew Cuomo. He's running against Donald Trump. Donald Trump is the front runner here, right?
He is running against, really, at both the federal level and the state level. We're seeing that there is no rule of law anymore. There's a constitutional breakdown. There's less and less separation of powers. And that's what Senator Ted Cruz is saying, is his goal is really to restore this idea of a constitution that the country used to hold to.
But you and other folks who are supporting Ted Cruz, what if Donald Trump is in fact the nominee at the end of the day? Now, I know what you're trying to do is hold him under that magic 1237 number to get the delegates at the convention so he can get the nomination, et cetera, and it could end up to be a big fight or brokered or whatever. But if he's the nominee, what are you going to do? Are you going to vote for Hillary Clinton?
Well, that's a hypothetical situation that we'll get to when that time comes, should it come.
But you have to prepare yourself. It could or could not go your way.
It would take an awful lot of prepreparation. We'd have to vote for Donald Trump. So I agree with that. It would take some preparation.
So you just stay home?
So, no, I'm not saying that either. I'm saying when we get to that position, we'll have to make that call. One of the things that I know many in my community have done is they have written to and they've reached out to Donald Trump trying to get clarification on some of his positions, and those calls have not been answered. One of the issues that we're most concerned with right now and why Senator Ted Cruz is resonating so much is the balance of the Supreme Court. And we know what we're getting in a judicial nominee that would come from a Ted Cruz. We're not sure what we're going to get from Donald Trump. That's a major issue that people are looking at.
Well, what about John Kasich?
Who? Yeah, he's running, really third and really has fewer delegates right now than we see from Marco Rubio.
Well, no, but in the recent Quinnipiac poll, it's showed that, and other polls show that he runs the strongest against Hillary Clinton should she end up being the nominee on the Democratic side.
In this country, you've got to win those delegates.
That's true.
He is
but no one may have sufficient delegates to get to the convention. And if they get to the convention with nobody having sufficient delegates, then what should happen in your opinion?
That's the misnomer. You still have to win the delegates. If you don't win them by the time you get to the convention, you got to win them in convention.
Right.
And I just do not see that Governor John Kasich is going to be able to do that.
So are you, the Republican Party did change the rules in terms of delegate awarding, right? So you don't actually run a slate of delegates in New York anymore on the Republican side, if I'm not mistaken.
Right. Well, there's a lot of nuances to these rules and whether or not they're even going to change again before we actually get to the convention. So there's a real question there as to what's actually going to look like. But I think that Senator Cruz is really running a smart campaign. He's already lining up those delegates that should have come to a brokered convention, and increasingly it's looking that way, that he will have the delegates he needs to be the next president of the United States.
Well, I was going to say, does that include you? I mean, will we see you at the convention? Will you be a Ted Cruz delegate?
Well, I will not be a Ted Cruz delegate for the GOP nomination, but certainly I will be supportive of his efforts.
And what about his efforts and his political strategy here? I mean, in my opinion, it's smart to go into the belly of the beast, which is him going into arguably, as I said, the Bronx, very Democrat-dominated area, and get a lot of free media, because he has a presence in this state. I mean, as far as I could tell, he doesn't really have a campaign structure in this state. Now, you and I were talking that really none of the Republicans have a great campaign structure. Donald Trump also relying a lot on earned media, and he's a strong supporter presence in Western New York, but he doesn't have any campaign offices, I don't think. He did announce a whole lineup of people who are supporting him, but I haven't seen that from Cruz.
Right, or even from the Trump campaign. We heard it'll be this large list, and it was a much shorter list than was anticipated. So really the structure is not there. It's anybody's game as far as that goes. I think it really is a delegate battle, and that's what we're looking at. The strategy, I think, for Ted Cruz is going to be turning out that grassroots voter that you're seeing. And that's what we saw at McKeel Christian Academy today when he spoke there. And you saw grassroots people. These are people who took their day off of work to come down to meet the candidate, to be there with their kids, and to give up of their own schedule to commit themselves to a campaign.
Well, he's been doing very well with the evangelical vote, but what is the percentage of the evangelical vote in New York?
Well, there's 640,000 evangelicals in New York State. And remember, they're only looking at 2.5 million Republican voters. Now, not all 640,000 vote, but it's a significant portion. And so I think that's important to recognize that it matters. But look at Wisconsin. Senator Ted Cruz was not expected to do well there at all. You could argue that labor movement was very large there. They had an open primary, and yet he still trounced Donald Trump in Wisconsin. And so I think it shows that he really is winning over more than just the evangelical community, but it's politics 101. Start with your base and move from there.
So you say it's by design that he is not rolling out a list of elected officials who are supporting him?
I think that there will be some who will come out and show their support, but right now he's been focused state by state. He won Wisconsin, he's moved to New York. Those conversations are happening. You know, frankly, when I looked at the list of those that were coming out for other candidates, I was surprised how paltry they really were. It does not look like many elected officials at all are coming out for any of the candidates just yet. There's just too much moving parts right now in this primary for candidates and elected officials to really be able to commit one way or the other without burning some of their base back home.
Ted Cruz, I mean, he was speaking to a friendly crowd. He was preaching to the choir, so to speak, right? He called Hillary Clinton, I think, a wild-eyed socialist. Were those the words that he used today?
I think he may have used that in reference to a bit of humor he had there, yes.
Do you agree with that assessment? I mean, usually when we hear socialist, we hear of self-professed Democratic socialist Bernie Sanders. I don't think, and Hillary Clinton has used that against him, saying he's not a real Democrat, actually. Then you have Ted Cruz adopting that language and trying to paint both of them as, crazy.
Well, that was actually the humor, and what he was doing was he set the argument. We're all waiting for him to say Bernie Sanders, and then he made reference to, and Bernie Sanders. And so in context, it meant an entirely different thing. But you know what? I agree. With both of, whether it's Bernie Sanders or Hillary Clinton, they're going to take us far down the path that I don't want to go. I will take Donald Trump, and I will look at him, and I'll say he's not a whole lot different in some of the positions that I see from some of those candidates, and I'm landing with Ted Cruz.
So what can we expect between now and the April 19th primary from Ted Cruz? I mean, obviously, he was in the Bronx. He was in the Albany area. What next? Will he go up on the air? We see Hillary Clinton on the air today. I mean, will he bother to spend that much money, or is he just going to do what he can with the grassroots and move on?
Well, I think that anybody who's looking at the numbers game here recognizes that New York is not going to the battleground state for the national election. So here I think it's really about making sure that he picks up as many delegates as he can, but it's not like Ted Cruz has to come in first to New York State to be able to go on to that convention. So I think you're going to see some delegates he's going to work to peel off. There'll probably be some very strategic things that are done, as he's done all through this campaign, and then pick up as many delegates as he can as then he moves towards that convention.
I think I saw a report that former New York City Mayor Rudy Giuliani is predicting that Donald Trump will win more than 50% of the vote in New York on the 19th. Do you think that's the case?
I don't think he will. I think actually you will see that Senator Ted Cruz will come in second place here in New York. Perhaps he'll do better. I would love to see him come in first, but it's just a few short days away. I think he'll come in second place, and I think you're going to see Donald Trump held below 50.
Well, obviously we will see. We will see very soon. In the meantime, things are moving fast and furious, and I thank you so much for your time, Reverend. It's great to see you.
Thank you.